Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we are talking about cosmetic regulatory, the essentials of that. I am Perry Romanowski from chemistcorner.com. With me today is Karen MANN, and she is going to start the presentation right now. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to put it in the chat, and we will answer them at the end of this presentation. All right, Karen, do you see the slides?
I do indeed, Perry. Thank you.
All right. Ready to go.
Okay, welcome everybody to this webinar. I'm delighted that there's so many of you and also so many from all around the world. So for those people who don't know about me, I'm currently setting up my own company, as Barry mentioned. But prior to that, I was Regulatory Affairs Global Director, as well as Head of Quality at Dolce & Gabbana, and equally at Intercos. I've had a lot of experience in the big multinationals, and in particular, I spent over 12 years at L'Oreal. The first 4.5 years were spent in the factory under quality and writing methods of manufacture for all the various batches. I then moved to Paris for about 11 years, where I worked in the Global Regulatory and Scientific Affairs Department and R&D. I have, as you can see by the PhD, a doctorate in inorganic chemistry from Bristol University, and I obtained 15 publications. You can find all more detail about me, but also all the list of the publications that were done on my LinkedIn profile. As well, if you would like to email me with specific questions or opportunities for working together, you find my email here at karen@heyjustinkeys.com. So what we will do is discuss a variety of different cosmetic topics. As Barry mentioned, we have launched a regulatory essentials course together with Barry. And all of the points that I'm going through in the webinar are really just a highlight of the icebergs, because of course the training course goes into much more detail. But it's to give you a little bit of a top-line overview of the type of topics which you can find in the course, and also how the course is a little bit different to the other courses out there. So as I said, I'm taking really the key concepts from the course. The first topic is really to look at the definition of cosmetic products and also why this is important. Now here you will see the European definition, and during this webinar I do focus quite a bit on the European regulations. Now the reason for that is the European model is essentially inspires many countries' legislation models throughout the world. You can also see that for MOCRA, for the US, they have modeled some of their new developments on the cosmetic regulations, as has also China. So if you understand some of the concepts of the EU regulations, you are equipped to kind of understand a lot of how cosmetics are regulated in any country of the world. So the important points about the cosmetic product definition in the regulations 1223/2009. Two key points are the target site of application, as well as the intended main cosmetic function. Now, why is this important? Well, when you're developing a brief, or the marketing has developed a particular concept and a particular product, the regulatory team or external consultants, you need to understand what this product is exactly. If a product fits inside the definition of a cosmetic product, then you can safely say it is a cosmetic However, if your target site of application is not the human body, because I know there are products being developed, for example, for dogs, like a perfume for dogs. So the external parts of the human body, but equally the teeth and the mucous membranes of the oral cavity are included. If your product is not meant to be placed within these areas, then we can say that it is not a cosmetic product. The other criteria is to make sure that your product function falls under the definition in the regulations. So we have a variety of cosmetic functions here, from cleaning to perfuming, changing appearance, etc. Now, if my product falls under the definition of a cosmetic product, we can safely say, I don't know if you can see my mouse, we can safely say that the product is a cosmetic and it therefore falls under the obligations required of the European regulations, if indeed we're in Europe. You will see in this slide that you also have other regulations. Now, this is basically when you're starting to get into borderlines. So these are the regulations from food, medicine, toys, textiles, biocides, and chemicals touch on the cosmetic regulations. Now, why is this important? Because, for example, if you have invented a mixture and you believe it is a cosmetic product, you go to the definition and you realize that actually your product is intended to be ingested or inhaled, for example. Now, if that is the case, we can conclude it is no longer a cosmetic product. So therefore, we would then need to go to the medicine regulations and check the definition of a medicine. And you will see that a substance that is meant to be ingested or inhaled is definitely not a cosmetic and therefore is potentially a medicine. Why should I care where my product fits, which legislation? Well, first of all, if you're in the wrong legislation, you will incur a lot of potential exorbitant costs. So to register a medicine, for example, is much more time-consuming and costly than it is to register a cosmetic product. Equally, as Barry said earlier, you risk going to prison or face heavy fines. And in the end, you won't be able to put your product onto the market anyway. And you've spent hundreds of thousands developing the product, all to no vain. So it is absolutely one of the key concepts that I would like to drive home is you absolutely need to know the definitions in these regulations, and you must ensure that your product, if you want to sell a cosmetic, falls under those cosmetic regulations. Now then, the next topic are the drivers of ingredient restrictions. In the training, I go into much more detail, and I go into detail of every one of these points that are listed on this slide. But you may know that historically, legislative restrictions were the only way that cosmetic ingredients were restricted, in particular in cosmetic products. And the legislation primarily is based on human health. So, for example, in the EU, and it's similar in the US, the government has a consultancy body called the Scientific Committee in the EU and the Cosmetic Ingredient Review in the US. The government therefore mandates these advisory bodies on a particular restriction for a certain ingredient, because maybe it's had some news, maybe it's had some input from other stakeholders. These bodies assess the available safety data of that particular ingredient, and they will issue a yay or nay confirmation to the government. This is not binding because then the government needs to make the legislation. So under legislative, we've seen more and more that concerns surrounding the environment, linked also to sustainability and the way that humans are treating the planet. And the chemical legislation is becoming even more and more close to the cosmetic legislation, particularly in Europe. And then, of course, we have different percentages of restrictions around the world, which creates divergencies across all of global markets. In this particular case, it is advisable to follow the most restrictive if you're launching globally. So legislative, I think, are more known in terms of restrictions when you're formulating your products. However, these days, consumer perception is driving more and more ingredient restrictions. And note that this is perception, and it may or may not be the reality of the situation. So, for example, with the rise of social media, there are various apps. There's an app from Germany where consumers can check ingredients and find out information about them. The problem is that this information might not be scientifically validated. So a lot of general public might well, follow these disinformation from the social media and make decisions based on that information. So in the end, if your consumers are not buying your products because it has parabens in them, you therefore will eventually be forced to remove parabens from your formulations and find alternatives. In terms of consumer perception as well, you have other factors due to the cruelty-free, so the non-animal testing. And also, following COVID, consumers want to feel more of a connection with the products that they're buying. And therefore, they want to have more value-based innovation. So innovation that touches their values. Then we have trends. You're well aware of the clean beauty trend, but there is also the green trend, green chemistry trend, which is happening more and more in Europe due to the chemical policy, which is to have zero pollution. And therefore, in order to have what is perceived as a clean product or a green product, you might therefore need to cut out certain ingredients. We also have logos and standards. These you have to pay for generally. So I could ask myself as a consumer, oh, I see a logo for vegan on this product, but I don't see it on this product. But both products are vegan. Which communicates more to the consumer? Is it the logo or is it other communication that comes in? And then linked in with the environment are sustainability concepts. I would probably say that mica, for example, is ethically sourced. Also, the round table on sustainable palm oil, are you a member of that, and so on. And lastly, we have the companies themselves. So many brands might decide to put in place their own blacklist, which are their own regulatory restrictions above and beyond the regulations. And equally, retailers, for example, Sephora is a well-known retailer. Equally, in the US, I think it's Whole Foods. To put your product into their store, you have to be able to prove that your formulations meet the requirements of their own blacklist, essentially. So the important point I want to drive, excuse me for the pun, drive home is that legislative restrictions are the easy part. The difficulty is now coming in with all these other drivers of cosmetic restrictions. And when you're creating your blacklist, you need to consider all of the sources of restrictions. I explain what I mean next. So let's take an example of this with some particular category under the spotlight. One example is surfactants. Bear in mind that in the training, I go through a lot more categories and explain some of the issues of these particular ingredients. So here we have a classic example of surfactants. And as I'm sure you may well know, is that there are 4 different categories. Anion X with a negative charge, cation X with a positive charge, amphoterics with a dual charge, and non-ion X with no charge at all. So surfactants essentially are very effective at cleansing. Most often used in shampoos and soaps, these type of things. And anion X, for example, are classically have been used a lot, particularly the laureth sulfates. However, the problem with anion X is whilst they are very effective at cleansing the hair, they also create a great foam, which of course appeals to consumer perception because the consumer thinks that if I have more foam, the product is cleansing my hair more effectively, which actually, in fact, is not the case. So the problem with anion X is the irritation potential. Now, due to this category as a whole, you'll think, okay, irritation potential. This says then, unfortunately, it gets taken out of context and the consumer starts to get worried about it. And then also the media get hold of it. You have the standard press, but you also have other stakeholders like NGOs, charities, and so on. And something that has a concern at the beginning could potentially be exploded into a much bigger issue than it was originally. So, for example, just because anion X or sodium lauryl sulfate is known as to be irritating, there might be others within that category that one could choose in the formulation, reducing the percentage so that you get the foam, less irritation, but equally combining them with some other surfactants. And I think these messages don't come across, but at the end of the day, if you don't make sales, then you have to work on influencing the consumer and educating, which is what I'm also trying to do. Cationics, these are the quartz. Here we have toxicity concerns, both with the skin, systemic, but equally aquatic. So these are a bit tricky to navigate. Amphoterics are actually the best out of the bunch, betanes and propionates, and these have generally, I'm saying generally, low safety and environmental toxicity. And lastly, non-ionates you have to be careful with, mainly due to the amine group, because, for example, cocamide DEA, diethanolamine, these type of products, you get a risk of nitrosamine releases. Now, maybe you would not have known that if you're in sales and marketing. You may not know that you get nitrosamine releases. And then you come to launch your product. And say, for example, an authority says, can you prove to me that this formulation does not release nitrosamines? And you thought, oh no, I didn't know, I haven't done it. Then the problem is we're now under a time delay because you then have to test your product, find a supplier or an external party who can do the test for you. You have to ensure that the protocol is recognized by the country that you're trying to register your product in. This is often a cause of a barrier to trade. Then you have to do the test, and this could take a couple of months. So essentially, by having the knowledge of this particular fact, as well as other regulatory concepts, you can anticipate this and do it during the product development process and have this information in your back pocket. But essentially, what I want to be very clear about is when you're compiling a blacklist, you need to know the source of the restriction or the ban, either by yourself or the legislation or the consumer or the media or anybody else for that matter. And this is quite tricky to follow. So now we look at placing products on global markets. Now, all of these topics in isolation could warrant an 8 or even an 8-hour or a week-long training course. I only have 40 minutes, so I really am skimming the surface. But I think the key message that I want to drive home is in the actual training, I'm not listing all the regulations. The purpose of the training is really to help you understand the principles behind the global regulations, why there are legislations in the first place, what type of things are legislated, and help you navigate the trade barriers that do arise. So, for example, giving you just some overview of the types of approaches for global markets. You have from the left, you have the easiest, which is shipping. And you have very few documents that are required. Countries such as Lebanon, Qatar, and so on just have shipping requirements. However, as you move further to the right on the slide, you will see that the complexity starts to increase. Now, for notification, you might think, yay, woohoo, I've notified my product. I don't have to do anything else. It is a bit of a false idea because it is true that once you've done the notification, essentially you can put the product into the market. However, the issue is that prior to doing the notification, you need to have all your documentation as your ducks in a row before you notify. And the reason is, particularly for the EU, we have a system of in-market control, where in fact that once product is notified, the government is, all the member states in the European Union is aware that your product's on the market. They could decide one day to do an in-market control, for example, on heavy metals or animal testing. You have about 48 hours to respond to the authorities. And if you do not have all the documentation in your back pocket, you're going to have problems. And you can get into a lot of hot water in this particular case. So I suppose really that notification really symbolizes you need to have all your documents ready before you do the notification. Lastly, with registration, sorry, just to mention for notifications, some can take you 5 minutes, like for the EU. Others, maybe Canada, could take 2 weeks, and then you can put your product in the market. With registration, however, this is the most complex. And you will need to have a prior authority approval before placing your product on the market. So this means that, yes, you've got all your documents. Then you need to make sure that you fulfill the criteria for those documents. And I'm not joking, but some authorities will reject your application if a dot or a comma is in the wrong place. And therefore, attention to detail is paramount, because otherwise they could find any excuse to reject your product. Many countries in North Asia, like China, Japan, require registration. Also, some in Latin America, some countries, Russia does as well. And there are different requirements for each market. Time-wise, from registration can also vary from 2 weeks to 2 years, depending on the type of product. Now, in the training course, I go into detail of each document that can be found under these 3 categories. First of all, you can have documents relating to ingredients themselves and also the formulation. The second category are linked to the actual finished product itself. And then the third category are linked to the file that you need to keep in your back pocket, which are the product information file and the cosmetic product safety report. Now, you as a company could decide to personalize this, and you could say, okay, well, depending on the markets that you sell in, I need to create a kind of a file which includes all the documents that are required for sale globally, and have that ready, either if I want to notify or register, or if I have an inspection. So just to give you a little example of ingredients, you can, for example, claim on your finished product that your product is vegan. However, if you do claim that, or gluten-free, you have to be able to substantiate that by essentially checking every single raw material, and you would need to go back to the supplier data to check this information. Highly time-consuming, but if you have the right tools in place, you can make this process a lot easier. You have various other types of ingredients, like substances of very high concern, pesticides, CMRs, which are a serious hot topic at the moment, and genetically modified organisms, and so on. So each of these, you would develop a statement, and you can use a specific model or a format. So now let's look at the EU responsible person as well as the distributors. Bear in mind that MOCRA has introduced now the concept of responsible person for the US, and also China has done the same. So whilst I focus on the EU, a lot of this can be extrapolated. So if you want to place a product on the European market, you need to ensure that you have a legal entity or a natural person is designated as your responsible person. And one of the key points, and I mentioned this earlier with regulations, is that you have obligations. And depending on the regulation, depends on the obligations that you have. Now, one thing that is very important is if you decide as a brand, I don't have time to be the responsible person. I would like to delegate this activity to somebody else who must, in Europe, in the case of Europe, it must be established within the European community and also China, in fact. Now, it is absolutely essential that you designate this by written mandate. The reason is because there could potentially be a dispute. If, say, for example, the obligations haven't been fulfilled, either by the brand or the designee, then in the eyes of the law, you're not compliant, and you are therefore liable to the consequences. And one person, the brand says, I'm not the responsible person, you should have done it. The other person says, no, I'm not either. And you can get into a lot of hot water if this is not fully documented. And in fact, it is a case that I was involved with. And lastly, if you would like, and you're importing products into the EU, your importer or the distributor to the European Union can also be a responsible person which needs to be documented and ideally in the mandate, but also in the contract. The responsible person actually has a lot of things to do and a lot of things to think about. All of these are detailed in the course, but the first and foremost I've mentioned are the obligations. However, one of the primary obligations is safety, and you have to ensure that, in fact, the ingredients comply with the legislations, which equally means it complies with the safety aspects. But you also need to ensure that you consider other ingredients like CMRs, which is, as I said, a hot topic. Also, nanos are hot topics. So are traces like heavy metals, and also animal testing. All of these things need to be validated and proven. So if you are the responsible person and you subcontract your production to an outsider, you have to ensure and have proof that your subcontractor is adhering to these guidelines and principles and the legislation, of course. And you have other concepts such as claims, that they are not misleading and they are backed by valid scientific evidence. And you have other things such as information to the public, which you are obligated to provide, particularly in relation to ingredients and the warnings and the product function. And that leads on to the labeling, which needs to be in the language of that particular market. Serious undesirable events, which the US are also taking on, is communication to the poison center in the case of Europe. If someone has gone to hospital, or as it has happened with hair dyes, a person has died. And in that case, all of the member states in the European Union will be informed. And the relevant appropriate measures will be taken. And then lastly, you need to ensure good manufacturing practices, either through auditing or, if you're happy enough, with a declaration, an auto declaration. Now, just because you're a distributor does not mean that you are, you don't have to have certain obligations. Even as a distributor, you do have obligations which are stated, even if you're not the responsible person, that are stated in the legislation quite clearly. These vary from the labeling to the language requirements. And in fact, I go into a bit of detail on the artwork section of the course about the language requirements and how to navigate this, because I've had many examples in my professional life of how to navigate artworks, and they are quite tricky. Then we have various other aspects that you need to cooperate with the authorities. You need to do corrective actions as is necessary, and particularly transport and storage do not jeopardize any compliance or affect the stability of the product as well. Now, we do deep dive into claims in the training. Obviously, I can't go very deep here, but some overall concepts about claims that I think most of you are aware that a claim is a statement of facts or reality about a product. But have you actually thought about images? And what about graphs or pictures? And also, what about ads on the television? Because if you infer or communicate a subliminal message about a product that implies the product doesn't have the characteristics, then in fact, you are not compliant with the legislation. And you have to really think about the images and the concepts that you are trying to convey to consumers. And the problem is with advertising particularly, not so much the claims on the pack, but it's more the advertising with the TV. Is the UK and the US are the strictest markets in the world on advertising. And you have advertising standards bodies. And basically also in Europe, if you want to make, sorry, in the UK, if you want to place a television ad, you have to prepare a claims dossier, which needs to be pre-approved before you can place the ad live in the market. The problem with the US and the UK is if they find you in contravention of the law, either you change your advertising, but if you have somehow managed to do advertising and it is incorrect, they can put you on their website and basically say, this company has falsified claims about this, that, and the other, and so on, which of course is not good publicity for you or your brand. There are many different types of claims. Performance claims, you're well aware of. Ingredients, maybe even formulation, sensory or aesthetic claims, comparing products and product types, environmental claims, consumer perception, and also the puffery, which can be some marketing claims. Just to give you an example, because I go through each one of these, the performance claim is really that you have to prove that the cosmetic product has the effect that it is trying to do in relation to the cosmetic product definition. You essentially are showing how the product will perform and how effective it is. And you can consider the duration, how long the product is operational, and what it does. So, for example, long-lasting, reduces appearance of fine lines up to a certain percentage, and equally UVA protection, which of course affects the aging of the skin substantially. Now, all of this has to be substantiated through testing, which is quite tricky because you have to decide what is the relevant test for your claim. You have to decide on your panel. And this is quite an important point because if you're making a claim about combination skin, you must ensure that your panel all have combination skin. So, and everything must be statistically valid. All of this, I do go through in much more depth to help you navigate this aspect of claims. Now then, sorry, excuse me for that, but a new product development in bright yellow. So one of the things that we do in the course as well is really we start right from the beginning, which is the product brief, and we go right through to the end. Not just when the product is placed on the market, but equally when you're thinking about quality. If you get customer complaints, that feedback needs to then go back into the product development process, right through to the beginning again of the concept and then the brief. So there are a variety of product development forms. We have develop and extend, which primarily are for products like makeup products where you are extending the colors. Repackaging, you might want to repackage a particular product with some innovative type of eco-friendly packaging. Or maybe you want to do reformulation of a current product that you have in your portfolio, which could either be a minor change or a major change. And or you might have this innovative new ideas for formula and or packaging. And lastly, we have Me Too products, which is essentially you're racing to grab a piece of the existing market share. Now, it depends. I mean, some people manage their product development differently to others, but you can either do this internally and have your process of gates to monitor your new product development. But you can also subcontract your product, and you might think that, okay, well, I can put my feet up. But in fact, it's not the case. Even if a supplier is doing your development for you, you need to follow and be a partner with your supplier throughout the duration of the product development process. So essentially, if we're using a gate process, the first step is obviously the concept. You have to decide what is the product you will design. Regulatory touches on this in terms of safety. So if, for example, you want to, marketing want to create a certain product and you foresee safety concerns, which has happened actually, you need to give the feedback to the marketing and work with them to identify another way to do it. This, in fact, is how regulatory is creative. It is, in fact, looking at product briefs, coming up with alternative suggestions, maybe claims, maybe the safety, maybe the product type. But equally, when you're trying to get your product registered. So you're also looking at compliance, particularly for the actives, and also your launch markets. So you need to have a helicopter view as to the proposal and give some input at this point, which is basically the once the brief has been finalized at gate 1. Then when you're looking at lock, this is when your formula has essentially been drafted. It's a preliminary formula, maybe a proposal from a subcontractor or a people in-house. So you need to work with the labs to do a preliminary blacklist check if you have one, and also look at, do all the global country checks. Then you need to review the claims wording, and at this point you probably would need to have a claims process in place, and then work with R&D for finding alternatives. It depends how much regulatory are involved with R&D in this particular case, of course. And then gate 3 is commit, is basically when you have your final formulation has been approved, you've done your final checks, and the artwork has been validated for the markets. And you have your safety assessment and your PIF file and any other documentation you would like to be ready so that you can go ahead and do notifications of registrations. Cosmetic Vigilance is essentially being vigilant and following the cosmetics when they've gone to the market. This is linked in with quality. And also you would get involved with safety as well, especially if there's an undesirable event. In the course, I also touch on the R&D touch points in the process as well, and go into more detail. So now I've come to the end of this high-level overview of the various different regulatory topics which you can choose to deep dive on. Now we'll look a little bit about this regulatory course and exactly explain to you exactly what it is. And lastly, I mentioned that I'm setting up my business, and I would like to share with you a little bit what I can offer you at this stage. So, as you know, this project has been done in collaboration with Perry, so I'm delighted with the collaboration. And he has published the course on his Chemist Corner website. Now, if you've done any of Perry's courses already, you will know Perry's style, which I totally agree with. Of flex and flow. Now, the course is structured in modules, and within those modules, you have little videos of maybe 15-20 minutes. The slides are pre-recorded, so you have my face on the screen talking and guiding you through the slides. So in fact, when you purchase the course, you have the slides for life, and there's no deadline, and if you feel like it, and you are restricted for time, you can, in fact, read or do a page at a time. There's no hard and fast rule. So either binge it or take it step by step at your pace. The choice essentially is yours. As I said before on the scientific focus, this course is, yes, it's regulatory, but it's also not. The reason being is I want to do, as I said to you before, I want to share with you the principles behind the regulations. There are a lot of people and a lot of consultancies out there who can give you the strict black and white legislation, but I don't really think that is helpful for you. I believe that what's more helpful is to teach you how to navigate regulatory and essentially swim in the grey. Because at the end of the day, you're a business or you're working for a business, and you need to have an entrepreneur mindset, even though it's regulatory. As I mentioned before, it's end-to-end, so the whole journey throughout the product life cycle. And as I mentioned before, I'm really showing you how to catch your own fish. And hopefully the additional knowledge will give you the ability to make more effective decisions, particularly when you have barriers to trade or blockages and you can't move forwards. Now, yes, there is a cost involved. I see on the chat that you can save $50 at the moment on the course. However, yes, it's an investment, and you could argue, well, okay, the cost. However, I'd like to just share with you how this knowledge could help you. Now, we all know that knowledge is power, and I've also added negotiation. And the reason why I've said this particularly is the more knowledge you have, and this applies in life generally, in fact, but in fact, you need the authorities on your side so that you can make money. So your target is to influence the authorities. So the way to influence the authorities is to have a seat at the table. This is the first and foremost point. If you're not able to have a seat at the table, you cannot negotiate with them. And it also gives the impression, a negative impression, that you might not know the industry as well. I give you a concrete example. I can't really mention the brand names, but it happened a while ago, and I think it's still the case. Normally, when you're trying to register a product or launch a product on the market, you have the legislation of that country. And in that legislation, they will list the documents that you need to provide in order to register the product on the market. Obviously, if you cannot register or notify, you cannot sell. So there was this case where it's one company, but within that company, there are two brands. And we're trying to launch a product in a Middle Eastern market. Now, brand A, for example, had built a relationship with the authorities, and equally paid a lot of attention to the presentation of the documentation, which is equally important. If the politics of a country is to create a trade barrier, they will find any reason to block your product. And I do mean full stops also count. So brand A, for example, created a strong relationship. And how did they do that? One is the presentation of the document. Two, they had knowledge, so they were able to push back and to have discussions and negotiations with the authorities. They came across as credible. If the authority challenged them, they were able to present their arguments in a logical fashion. Now, this is in contrast with brand B, who was not able to do that. And in fact, if the authority asked for a document, they just supplied a document. But in certain markets, you can negotiate with the authorities. And in fact, with this particular authority, same country, same company, but two different brands, one brand got through with very little time registered, with very few documents. The other brand had to supply all the documents listed in the legislation. and it took a lot longer. So if your time to market is lengthened because of this issue, you therefore can't make sales, and therefore this will affect your bottom line, which leads me on to money. Now, for example, when I was working at a subcontractor, one of the key objectives to make money was obtaining business awards. So basically, there was a high-profile company, a very famous brand, and it was a €1 million project. And the technical teams, in fact, the whole team blocked the business award due to a technical issue. Now, in fact, it was linked to titanium dioxide, whether it was nano or non-nano, and a test report had been supplied. But the test report was a little bit inconclusive and wasn't sufficient to get past this company. So the business award was still blocked. It took about a month of a lot of negotiation. Again, knowledge is power negotiation. And eventually we found out their concern, we found out what the issue was, and we redid the test and issued the results, and they deblocked it. So essentially, the company gained a 1 million. And lastly, in terms of productivity, this actually also happened in relation to the omniverse, which is a complicated legislation of CMRs, carcinogenic, mutagenic, reprotoxic materials. And the issue was they wanted compliance for the omnibus that had happened and one that was coming up. So if you're not aware of this information, you're not able to anticipate and to make sure that you're compliant during the development process. So essentially, if you do know these things, you reduce your time to market, and equally you anticipate the barriers to trade for the future. And I do believe, okay, I wrote a course, but I do believe that this course will help you to fish and to give you these things that I've mentioned on this slide. Last but not least, Barry, I hope I'm not too over. So what I'm trying to do is set up my own company, and I've created a website, heytoskinkeys.com, essentially providing the keys to the skincare. And I'm going to launch the website in June, so as soon as launch, and Perry, I'm sure, can let you know. But basically, I just want to show you a little snapshot of the type of things that I could offer. If you would like a detailed brochure, then please don't hesitate to email me at karen@heytoskinkeys.com. So I don't just offer you regulatory, because my experience of about 18 years in the industry, I was a former director as well. So the strategic direction was part of my job. But equally, as you know, I've worked in quality for about 5 years. I have also, particularly in Paris, worked a lot with scientific affairs, which is mostly a lot of scientific topics like claims, protocols, testing, any other scientific topic, as well as R&D, and equally new product development. So basically, when we're looking at strategic direction, it's mainly of the technical teams, of course. I can help you with a direction, particularly as to where you want to go, and also provide the roadmaps. Equally, look at the operational execution, particularly for your areas, and also look at the structures that need to be put in place to make your processes very effective. And also look at the RACEs and the ways of working. For quality, this is really not so much quality control, and also not so much the filling, but more the bulk, is really the quality assurance. So how can you improve your right first time scores? Also in working with suppliers to help them do the things that you would like them to do, as well as improve various processes. Regulatory, I've mentioned a lot of these, but a particular important points are the anticipation and the regulatory intelligence. This is particularly important with artwork and ingredients and placing products on the market so that you do not get stuck. And equally, like we've seen with MOCRA, is really to do a business impact of the regulations. So you, for example, a year ago had literally to the end of last year to do all your product listings. You know, what do you actually need to put in place within your business to be in compliant with MOCRA by the end of the year for the product listings? As it happened, they extended it for 6 months, but it's better to be on the front foot. In terms of scientific approach, this is linked to claims, also with the formulation strategy and design. So if you want to do an eco-design formula, for example, ingredient company positions, which is also linked to the regulatory, the blacklist, and equally formula review to see if maybe a third-party subcontractor is what they're proposing makes sense and is in line with your policies. And then a new product development process, either put one in place or amend what is there for productivity gains. And then lastly is to deliver training and workshops and also the consulting, which I've just mentioned. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed this webinar, and feel free to email me. Thank you.
All right, so if you have a question, please put that there. But Karen, you can go to the questions. If you click on chat and then the Q&A. Yeah. Okay, go ahead, and I think you can see the questions there.
Eugene Frank has just put a question. He says, does this course primarily for EU regulations? The answer is I go through all the regulations. Okay, let me rephrase that because there's nearly 200 countries in the world. I talk about the 4 regulatory models, so the US, Canada, EU, and China. Okay, so we do go through that.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Jean. If you, Karen, if you click at the top, it says chat and Q&A only. Click on the Q&A only.
Echo.
Okay. So if we scroll to the top, I think the first question was about registering your products. So is there a way to register cosmetic products?
Yes, there is. And I do go into detail in the course about the registrations. Because in order to do the registrations, you need to understand the type of documents that are required.
Right.
So
and it's quite a broad, right? It's quite a broad question, and it's going to be different depending on where you're located. This is something that's covered in the course. Okay, I'm sorry, I don't have the questions anymore. So
okay.
You're going to have to see what the questions are there.
Barbara says, where do we find these rules regarding each ingredient? In the regulations. Sorry, Barbara. Sure. But basically, there are specific IT tools that you can use to make it much easier, because it's very difficult to do a check if you don't do it with the IT tool.
Yeah. Okay, next question here.
Barbara also asked about restriction for titanium dioxide on California for pressed powders and color cosmetics.
Yeah,
well,
so Prop 65 is a specific U.S. For the state of California only, but you know, it is kind of trumped by the FDA rules, and the FDA says that titanium dioxide is safe to use. It's okay to use in cosmetics at cosmetic levels. So it's not really a thing that has to impact your formulating, because as long as you're following standard cosmetic rules, you can use titanium dioxide.
Just a point to add, though, for the EU and titanium dioxide, that the rule is for products where you can inhale, so loose powders and sprays, there are limitations, and also in particular with the nano.
Yeah, I just want to point out right now on your webpage, you should see an offer. If you want to learn more about the course, about what's covered specifically, just click on that link, and you'll get to find out about the course. And there's a whole page that describes everything.
Okay. Question from Tieta Buana. What is highlighted in red still permitted in use? Maybe that was due to a specific slide.
Yeah, that you had the slides of the surfactants, and some of them, one of them was in red, and a couple of them were in blue.
Yeah, exactly. So, for example, that was a general comment for that particular category.
Right.
To know the limitations for each, you have to look at the individual legislation for that particular ingredient.
Right. So in the EU, there are specific usage range of a lot of ingredients. In the United States, there are not specific usage range, but there is the CIR, which is the Cosmetic Ingredient Review, and they have set limits to what is typically used in cosmetics. So as long as you're following what's typically used, you're okay. Here's a question that I do see. Javarieri says, parabens are banned for cosmetics, or can they be used at 0.2 to 0.3%? I think this is a common misconception about parabens. Huh?
Yeah, this is the problem because, of course, there are many types of chain length of the paraben with the carbon chain. It's a case-by-case basis, so some are authorized and some are banned. So
I think the important thing to note there, though, is the ones that are most commonly used in cosmetics are not banned. Yeah. So that's just a mistake. There are some ones that used to be used, they're not used anymore, but they were not really the popular ones. But stuff like methylparaben, propylparaben, these things are not banned, and they are specifically listed on the EU, what is that, appendix or
yeah, the annexes. Yeah,
the annex. Yeah, the annex list for preservatives, and you specifically can use them.
Yeah.
All right, you can go with the next one.
Oh, that's right. TC. It says, where do pet shampoo and conditioner fall under these regulations? Good question. I would say that it falls under potentially under two regulations. One would be the REACH chemical regulation, and potentially also a veterinary regulation. But of course, you have to check against the definition and the function and the purpose and so on.
Yeah.
Question from Richard. Is it helpful that here is a regulatory body that controls the cosmetics industry? It's a good question. I mean, for example, in Europe, we have the European Commission. I mean, they've written the legislation for cosmetic products. And then you have the FDA, which is now taking over the control of the cosmetics under MOCRA in the US. Yeah. And each country, there's a different department within their own government that looks after cosmetics. So I would say that it exists already.
Yeah, cosmetics are regulated, especially FDA in the United States, Health Canada, the EU commissions. So there already are rules. Now, in the US, the MOCRA rules are making things a little more like Europe. But, you know, it's also been delayed. So we'll see what happens with MOCRA.
Yeah.
United States, our government is sometimes dysfunctional. So things get delayed and they don't happen. So go figure.
Yeah. I like this question from Margot. Would I be able to bypass all the regulatory agency like bureaus costs after this course and do everything myself? I love it. Possibly.
Theoretically.
No.
I think one of the and if you had more to add, I'd go in, but I can chime in also.
No, go, Perry.
Oh, well, I think what's important here is, yeah, theoretically you could do that. Karen shares all kinds of information, all kinds of sources where you can find answers to questions. Of course, when you're taking the course, Karen will be available to answer questions via email. And so you have a direct link to, a regulatory consultant. But going through this course can't prepare you that way. But the thing is, you have to say to yourself, what part of my business do I want to focus on? Because focusing on regulations takes a lot of time. And it's great to know about them, but you don't want to necessarily do all the stuff yourself. If your goal is to have a successfully launched cosmetic product, you're going to need to spend most of your time on sales and marketing. Not formulating, not regulations, but sales and marketing, because that's what really hits the bottom line of driving sales. Regulatory keeps you out of prison. It keeps you out of fines. Formulating helps you make good products, but at the end of the day, it's sales and marketing which makes the sales.
Yeah. Question from Claire. What is the outcome of the RP registration? Is it a cover letter with all the detailed associated information about the obligations? Or it would just state that all the information has been reviewed? So basically what you receive is a document, just one, I think it's a one-pager, which is a license, and you get the license number. Just bear in mind that registrations are generally valid for 3 years. And after that, you have to renew the license.
Yeah.
A question from Denise Quitonda. I want to ask, how do you see the future of cosmetics or your expectations to safety? Mainly, what do you think about personalization of cosmetic products, where everyone has to make choice among products, and how regulations care about personalization?
Well, it's an interesting question. That is a challenge in formulating. There is a market trend of personalization of your products. I think personally that it's what the problem with that is that we live in a cosmetic world which is all about mass market. You know, you're not going to make a small batch and sell it to individual people. You're going to make a gigantic vat of thousands of gallons and then put that all into bottles and sell it to a lot of people. So I think the whole customization thing is really more of a marketing story. Now it's not reality of how production is done.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that, Karen?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, personalization, it doesn't matter in terms of the regulations. What I do see for the future, and particularly in Europe, when you ask about safety, is the chemical regulations and the cosmetic legislation as they stand now are going to get closer and closer together. Whether or not they actually end up merging, I'm not 100% sure yet. But the other alarming point is in the cosmetic legislation is based on risk and not just hazard.
Right.
The problem is in the future, I think they're going to base it more on hazard versus risk, which would mean that a lot of ingredients that we currently use will be banned. So this is a big problem.
I think that could be a significant problem. I think but I do think ultimately, since you're going to start making products that don't work as good, there's going to be pushback by consumers. And, you know, right now we can do substitutions of a lot of things and still make products that work almost as good. But once you start making things that don't work as good and they cost a lot more, I think industry is really going to start pushing back. Yeah,
totally agree. Tieta Buana, regarding cosmetic vigilance, is it the same as pharmacovigilance regulations? Is it mandatory for manufacturers to implement cosmetic vigilance for products, or is it optional? It is mandatory in the European Union and will be in America as well.
Yeah.
It's similar to pharmacovigilance, yes. Question from Kaylee.
I can see this one. I can see these now. Do you have experience commercializing new raw materials for cosmetic applications? Space I've been working on with the rise of biotech. However, it seems to be much gray area when you're talking about regulations. So how about the regulatory of raw materials?
So there's two aspects for raw materials. So ingredients specifically, which are regulated by the Chemicals Regulation. and also the Cosmetics Regulation. Now, for example, if your ingredient is not a colorant, a preservative, or a sun filter, and it's a new ingredient, you can go ahead and use it unless it's banned or restricted. If it is one of those three that I mentioned, you will have to get it approved onto a positive list. That's the case for Europe. If you're thinking about Canada, they have domestic substances lists. Australia has the AICS list. China also has these various lists, which I do go into in the training course to explain them. Basically, it means that every single ingredient has to be on one of those lists. So if your ingredient is completely new, you will have to get that put on all those various lists and frankly pay a lot of money and wait probably 3 years.
Yeah, so. Yeah. Now, in the United States, it's pretty much willy-nilly as long as you're not selling a colorant. If it's a colorant, you know, there's lots of rules. But if it's not an over-the-counter drug active, you know, you pretty much can use whatever. Now, you've got to be able to prove that the ingredient is safe. Exactly. The FDA does not tell you the specific way you have to do that, but you have to be able to prove something's safe. But if you can do that, then you can use the ingredient in the United States.
Yeah.
This one comes to us from Javiera. Says, which legislations for cosmetic is followed more, FDA or EU?
I think the EU, I think people do follow them quite closely. I think claims, perhaps claims less so, because we're always trying to push the boundary to make more money.
Sure.
I would say, but I think people in the US are going to have got a bit of a fright with democracy, so I think people are going to will follow it much more. So I think it's a positive thing.
Yeah. This one comes to us from David, and we just got time for a few questions. I apologize, my questionnaire, I had a technical issue, so I missed a lot of the questions. But if you sent in a question and it doesn't get answered here, we'll have your email of that, and we can answer it via email. Okay, we have a question from David. Are the RP requirements the same in the US as the EU? And how does one qualify for RP in the US?
They are similar, David, but they're not quite the same. I would say that the US at the moment has less obligation than the EU one. So what I can say is that if you follow the obligations in the European regulation and the cosmetic colorants and do the safety assessment in the same style as Europe, you'll be fine.
Okay, and we got 2 more questions that we'll answer, and then we'll wrap this up. I want to just tell you before we wrap this up, look at that offer, take a look at the course. We would love to have you join the course, and if you join from this webinar, you can save $50 off the price of the course. Okay, this comes to us from Claire. Do you know cosmetic regulation requirements in Hong Kong? Are they different from China?
Hola. That's a good question, because of course Hong Kong was a former British colony.
Sure.
They are now part of China, but I believe that the legislation is still much more simple than China itself, I think. I think I would have to check that, but they didn't have much legislation before.
They haven't fully incorporated into China, I don't think so. But they are slowly going that way. All right. This time for our last question. This comes from Nidhi. Heavy metal regulation is that applied to the finished product, or is that to the cosmetic raw materials?
It applies to the finished product.
Okay. There you go. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of this webinar Q&A. Thank you so much, Karen, for your great expertise. If you're interested in the course, please check the button to check out the rest of the course. I'm Perry Romanowski. This is Chemist Corner, and we thank you for joining, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.